Responsible for the lighting of the chalice in 3 Unitarian churches over the last 30 years. This is the first opportunity we've had to light a chalice together.
We gather together every week, bound not by a creed, but drawn together by a belief that how we are in the world, who we are together, matters. We light this chalice together in the knowledge that love, not fear, can change the world. And we knew this would happen, so we're going to have to try it again.
Okay, do it again.
It won't work.
Take a new match.
Oh.
And on the very end, I'm going to light it. Richard, come back here.
Wait a minute.
Richard, come back here.
What is it about you and matches?
Okay, stop it. We're going to use this.
We are?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We're going to use what?
This tape. Okay?
Okay. Should I stop it?
Beautiful. All right. Let's sing, guys. Here we go.
Is my singing so bad that you had to mute me?
No,
We heard you.
If too many
it
people
kept
are
muted.
singing, well, that was one of us. If too many people are singing at the same time, that completely screws up the audio.
Oh,
So there was not a personal criticism against you.
I was like, I'm unmuting myself. Sorry, I'm new to this. Bye.
So now, Michael, we would like to turn to you to for our prelude, and for everybody, this is an opportunity to prepare our hearts and our minds for what we're about to hear today, and for this moment to recollect ourselves after what I'm sure was a busy week for everyone, and focus on today. Michael?
So, yeah, while Alan is getting, I think Alan's going to play this video for you. While he's getting this up, I just want to do a quick, brief explanation of the first 2 songs we're doing today. The first is Summertime, and the next is Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child. Summertime was actually pretty directly inspired by Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child, which is a kind of a African-American spiritual. And yet Summertime, which was written by a white person, is the one that everyone knows and recognizes. And so I just like to bring attention to that Summertime is music that was inspired by African-American culture, but was pretty much co-opted by white people. And this is something that I'm acutely aware of as a jazz musician, because most of the music I play is like Black music. And we're pretty acutely aware that all this stuff has been really largely co-opted by white people. Doesn't make it any less great music. I still think Summertime is a great song, and I like playing it, but I think it's just important to be aware of that. So here's my rendition of Summertime, and then after that we'll sing Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child.
are jumping and the cotton is high. Oh, your daddy's rich and your ma, she's good looking. So hush, little baby, don't you cry. One of these mornings you're gonna rise up singing. Yeah, you'll spread your wings and you'll take to the sky. But until that morning, there ain't nobody can harm you. With Daddy and Mammy standing by. Summertime and that living is easy. Fish are jumping and the cotton is high. Oh, your daddy's rich and your ma, she's good looking. So hush, little baby, don't you cry.
Thank you, Michael. That was really lovely. I'd ask us all now to join in and sing together. Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child, number 97 in our hymn book, if you have one.
Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Long way from home. Long way from home. Sometimes I feel like I have no friend. Sometimes I feel like I have no friend. Sometimes I feel like I have no friend. A long way from home. A long way from home. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone.
That was lovely. And I'm glad you told us some more of that history between a motherless child and summertime. That's really interesting. And now if we could all join in as we're willing and able to say our unison affirmation. We pledge, oh wait, it needs to be on the screen. Sorry, Alan. I got a little carried away.
Go ahead and read it because I don't have it queued up.
Okay, sorry. We pledge to create a welcoming community that celebrates human diversity, encourages spiritual growth, fosters responsiveness to our world, and commits to the future of all children. And now I'd like to turn it over to Doug for part 1 for our congregation-wide book club on white fragility. And his topic today is, what does it mean to be white? Doug?
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Alan, for your help this morning. Good morning, everyone. It was nice to see everyone slowly join as we were awaiting the start of the service, and see all of you who have joined this service this morning. As Lindsay announced, this entire month of August, we'll be taking a look as a congregation at the book White Fragility, and I do hope you will have a chance to get a copy and to begin reading it. The church does have a few copies, and if you would like one of those copies, please let myself or Sue Klein know. And the book is also available by download, or to just buy an actual paperback copy from Amazon for $10. So it's hopefully not too expensive, and I do think it's a very important book. Last summer, there was a 20-year veteran teacher who was asked to conduct a study on discipline in her predominantly white school district. The anecdotal evidence suggested that Black students were being disproportionately disciplined. This teacher's study of actual data confirmed that perception and showed the disparity between discipline rates of Black and white students was very high. And this disparity obviously had to be reduced. So the district superintendent mandated that every teacher attend a 2-hour diversity class conducted by outside experts. And the outcome from the teacher training, however, was not good. A majority of white teachers were upset. They're calling us racists, many teachers said. And indeed, when asked what they had learned, many replied, nothing. Their reaction was common and not unusual. A Harvard University sociology study has found that required diversity trainings at businesses and organizations, they often fail to achieve the hoped-for outcomes. As the study noted, most required seminars and trainings and curriculum designed to address racism do not work because a majority of participants feel they have been labeled bigots. And their learning essentially shuts down because they feel insulted. And I confess that while that's never been the intent with racism-themed books like we're reading now, small groups and Sunday services held at GNH, all addressing racism, I imagine many members have felt they've been called racist and therefore bad people. I had a similar feeling from a discussion I had a few years ago with a person of color. My hope is that will not be the feeling that comes from our August Sundays discussing the book, White Fragility. The book's author, Robin DiAngelo, is very direct in saying that white supremacy and white privilege are the causes of racism. The national economic and social data, like that from the school district I just mentioned, are clear in showing there's a wide disparity disparity between blacks and whites in wealth, job positions, education, income, and healthcare. Such disparity was not created in a vacuum, as we all know. White supremacy was and is the cause. But D'Angelo's statement that virtually all white Americans are racist has less of an accusatory impact due to her other repeated statements that our racism does not make us bad people. She says this, quote, "We are a collective whole, born into a culture that made us what we are. We are not bad people, but we have inherited a dysfunctional and bad system and culture. If we can recognize that, much like we must do whenever we live in any bad situation, we can learn the signals and the characteristics that make it bad and try to grow out of it," end quote. I want to add here a personal analogy that I hope is helpful. 3 years ago, after my dad passed away, my siblings and I accessed a bank safe deposit box he'd had. And inside we found, amongst important papers, a revolver gun with bullets. And all three of us were immediately repulsed by the gun. What are we going to do with that? We asked. And since my sister and brother live in California, they could not take it with them on their return flight. The gun was left with me. And I viscerally hate guns. I'm against citizen ownership of handguns or semi-automatic rifles because they exist only to injure or kill people, often by suicide, accident, or domestic violence. And so I looked for multiple ways to safely get rid of the gun so that it would never be used. But the police would not take it, and they had no suggestions for getting rid of it except to sell it to a reputable gun dealer. And I did not want that. So there I was, by inheritance, an unwilling handgun owner. I could not ignore that fact or choose to do nothing about it. Responsibility for the problem, however, rested on my shoulders. And I am pleased that I finally and safely disposed of it. But I make this same argument about inheriting a bad situation with regard to racism. We did not initiate racism. We were raised in racist systems since the moment we were born. We live in a racist culture now, and we will almost assuredly die in one. As D'Angelo says, white people are figuratively marinated in white supremacy from cradle to grave. And indeed, you have a racist minister. I've benefited tremendously from white privilege. And built into my subconscious are years of subliminal racist messages put there by society. And Robin DiAngelo confesses the same about herself. She often says she has a racist worldview. She says this, quote, "I didn't choose to be immersed in a culture of white supremacy. It's not my fault, and I do not feel guilt or shame over it," end quote. And she says the same about all of us who are white. We are racists, but that's because we inherited systems of racism. We now enjoy their benefits, and for the most part, we've done nothing to stop them. But just like I was responsible for safely getting rid of the gun that I had unwillingly inherited, white people are also responsible for getting rid of inherited racial systems in our nation, to finally stop their inequity, pain, and continuation. And so even though as white people we are responsible to end racism, according to D'Angelo, that does not make us bad people. And I deeply hope we will internalize that phrase and remember it. It's key to us not being fragile when it comes to discussions on racism. We need to somehow move beyond feeling offended when we hear that we are racist. Indeed, our mantra during this month of Sunday services might be, I'm not a bad person. I will be a much better person by taking responsibility to eliminate inherited, conscious, and unconscious racism in me and in society. And to help us do that, my topic for this message and for our discussion afterwards is on the question, what does it mean to be white? Now, Robin DiAngelo offers a foundational belief that for most white people, they simply don't notice whiteness. It's much like the air. We rarely, if ever, consciously think about its existence, even though we immensely benefit from it. The 10 days after George Floyd was murdered, the author Robin DiAngelo was asked by Speaker Pelosi to address Democratic members of Congress. And here is what she said, quote, "For all the white people listening right now, thinking I am not talking to you, I am looking directly in your eyes and saying, it is you." She cautioned the white Democrats not to think that because they marched in civil rights protests, served a diverse Congress district, advocate social justice causes, or had a Black roommate in college, that they are exempt from self-examination. Until they reckoned with the question of what does it mean to be white, she said, they would continue to enact policies and practices, intentionally or not, that hurt and limit Black people. One prevailing factor in determining what it means to be white is, according to DiAngelo in the book White Fragility, the location of our homes and the schools we and our children have attended. Is our neighborhood mostly white? If so, why? If we had to move, are we sure we could buy or rent a home in an area we'd like to live, and one with good schools? Are the schools in our current neighborhood mostly white? If so, why? How many teachers in our neighborhood schools are Black? At what grade did we or our children have their first Black teacher or professor? Is our faith community mostly white? And is its minister white? If a police officer stops us, are we reasonably sure we've not been stopped because we are white? When we shop in a store and a clerk follows us, are we reasonably sure that's because they want to help us and not because they suspect most whites shoplift? When checking into a hotel, are we reasonably certain we won't be given substandard service or accommodations because we are white? When we seek medical care, do we worry our race will affect how we are treated? When we watch TV or go to the movies, are we mostly able to see characters and personalities who are white? When we see media depictions of Jesus and Mary, Adam and Eve, or any of the saints, are they almost always depicted as white? Are we mostly free to go wherever we wish in our country without fear of being considered different or dangerous? Are we almost always free from having to think about our race? Do we instead simply think of ourselves as human instead of as white? If we answer yes to these questions, as I have, then we've essentially said what it means to be white. Now, D'Angelo says our honest answers to these questions determine many of the prevailing privileges white people have. We enjoy what she terms in the book, White Fragility. We enjoy racial relaxation. We have no need to be continually aware of our race or situations that make our race dangerous. And if we think we might experience such a situation, we can always find predominantly white environments in which our whiteness protects and benefits us. We have the privilege of working and living free of thinking about being white. Now, dear friends, it seems to me that it's been too long for us to see the light. And that light is not that all people should be treated with equity. I believe we know that truth, and we deeply want it for our nation. The light I speak of is that which illuminates our inner selves. It shines on our unconscious reality, that we have advantages due only to our skin, that we inhabit and benefit from a culture of stark racism, that those who are Black suffer and we do not, and that we have inherited systems and practices that have taught us racist falsehoods. Our inner reality is something we have dared not examine, but it has damaged our Black brothers and sisters. It's damaged us. It damages our nation, and it will damage our children and our grandchildren. Now, in his inspiring eulogy for Congressman John Lewis this past Thursday, President Obama said, and I'm paraphrasing, that we must be like Lewis and do the work to create a more perfect nation. By implication, Obama said that means we as individuals and as a nation are imperfect. But the greatness of John Lewis, President Obama said, is that he exemplified the truth that in every person, Black and white, lies the courage to do what is right. President Obama's words could not be more true for us as we read this book, White Fragility. Let us summon our inner courage to consider with honest hearts this book and what it says. Let us pursue with courage truths about ourselves, truths about injustice in our nation, and then heed the call to do what is right. As decent, good, and courageous people, let's acknowledge we are imperfect in the unconscious racism we hold. But let us also summon the courage to take a path of changing ourselves so we can then help change society. I humbly ask you to take that journey with me this month of August and thereafter. And I wish you all much peace. Now I want to open it up for some discussion here. And I know it's a topic that it's challenging for any of us to consider and even discuss. But I do welcome your heartfelt thoughts and comments. And I want to start off with, if you have read this book or have started to read it, what are your thoughts about it? And do you think it can lead to some change in you or in others? And I do welcome your comments, and you can raise your hand, and Alan, Michael, Lindsay, or I will try and see you, or you may use the chat option. But I do welcome your comments and our discussion right now.
Linda's raising her hand.
Linda Gutowski, I'm trying to unmute everybody. Alan, would you do that?
Yeah, 1 second.
Linda,
Go ahead, Linda.
I just wanted to say that I had read the book and I found it very compelling, and it made me really think of so many things that I hadn't thought of before. You know, primarily about, you know, when I leave the house, I never have to think about the fact that I'm white. It doesn't occur to me. Whereas, you know, mothers and fathers of Black children have to instruct them how to act in public, how to act in front of police. And, you know, you know, I think that I was instructed by my parents about that, but not because I was white.
So that for you, Linda, that is one of the parameters.
That's one of the things, yeah. There is so much. I mean,
Oh, sure. But that's
really,
one of the parameters in terms of what it might mean to be white, that we don't even have to think about
right.
being white. Yeah.
Yeah. Very compelling book.
Thank you, Linda. I see Sue Sale.
Yeah. When you say we're immersed in our background, that is very, very true. And I'll give you just a small example. I was born and raised in Finneytown, which was an all-white community. And then they didn't have a high school, and I went to Hughes, which was pretty much mixed, not only racially, but socioeconomically. And my brother went there too. And I got used to it. And it didn't bother me at all. And then when our kids started school, they went to the bilingual academy, which was diverse and mixed. And so I kind of got used to it, but that does not absolve me. The point I want to make is my brother lived in Michigan in an all-white community, and then later in retirement moved to North Carolina, again to an all-white community. He went through the same background as I did in being in a very mixed society. Neither one of us had any fear in or around Hughes, although it was a very mixed neighborhood at the time, and socioeconomically was much more disadvantaged than we were. When he comes back to Cincinnati or any large city, he is scared to death. I am not. So that at that point you realize that it is background and it's what you're used to, who and the people you're around, what you're used to and what makes you uncomfortable. And here's a person who was raised the same way that I was. I do not feel discomfort, but he is scared to death when he's around anybody that is in a different race or socioeconomically different than he is. So that all of that plays into our white privilege.
In terms of how we've raised or how we have later.
Right, because as I said, it none of it even being anywhere around people of color or poorer people, and we lived in right up from the largest federal housing project in the area, because we were right up from Finlater Gardens. And my brother said on many occasions, "Doesn't it bother you that you have people like that walking by your house?" And I said, "No, why would it?" But
Yeah.
just removing yourself from it for a period of time creates a whole different atmosphere as to who you think you are and who these other people are.
Yes. Thank you, Sue. I see Ann McCracken. You'd like to speak?
Yes. When I lived in Cleveland, I dated an African-American man, and we had been out on his sailboat. It was 38 feet, and we had been, we'd had wine and hors d'oeuvres, and we sailed back into Cleveland, and it was really beautiful. The skylights were all on. And so when we got in, he said, "Do you want to go to dinner?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, what are you hungry for? What would you like to have to eat?" And I said, "Well, let's do Italian. Let's go to Murray Hill." And he looked at me and he said, "Do you want to die?"
Yeah.
Wow.
It was pretty sobering, something I never thought about before then.
Yeah.
I want to ask a follow-up question here to get a number of questions in here. Whether this applies to you personally or if you know of people, what do you think makes it uncomfortable for either you or other white people to talk about the issue of race and racism?
I think that I'll say a little bit about that because so whenever someone asks me about what the American dream is, it's like this idea of no matter who you are, where you come from, you can work really hard and you can get the things that you want. And so I always look to my mother when I think about this, because my mother came from literally dirt. She had nothing. She was Mexican. She was an immigrant. She wasn't legal until she was, well into adulthood. And she became a doctor. She literally became a doctor. But the thing about it is that even though my mom is Mexican, she looks pretty white, so she passes as a white person when she needs to, you know what I mean? If you hear her speaking Spanish and stuff like that, and you kind of look closely at her, you can tell that she's definitely not your average white person, but she looks pretty white. And so I think my mom is very, she's aware of all this stuff and everything, and I think she's aware that she benefited a little bit from white supremacy and all that. But when you look at someone like my mom, it's hard to separate saying something like that and from diminishing her accomplishments. You know what I mean? Like when you say something like you benefited from white supremacy, you have achieved what you've achieved because you're white. I'm not saying you've achieved what you achieved only because you're white. It's you've also done great work, and you're a great person, and your accomplishments are yours. But I'm just saying that they might not have been quite so vast if you hadn't looked like a white person. And that's what I feel for myself too, is that what's hard about it is admitting, like, I wouldn't have gotten as far as I have had I not come from the background that I did, had I not looked the way that I did, because even though I am half Mexican, you can't tell that from looking at me. I look like a white person. So I've benefited from that that thing. And I think it's hard for people to separate that from, when someone says you benefited from white supremacy, it sounds like you're diminishing all their accomplishments, and that's not what it is. But that's how it feels. So your initial reaction is an emotional one, not a logical one. And your emotional brain takes over and you go, no. And you set your foot down, you go, no, I've worked for what I have. And it's hard to overcome that.
Difficult.
I think the other thing too that's kind of an interesting piece of it, Doug, is just the nomenclature. Because hearing Michael talk about it as white supremacy as opposed to white privilege elicits different reactions. White supremacy is kind of at least for me, what I associate with the white supremacy movement, the kind of hatred for things different from them that is totally unconnected to reality. White privilege is, I think, really more of the questions that we were talking about today in terms of kind of the unconscious, as Linda said. I don't think about going outside. I mean, I went to school on the south side of Chicago. I was the only white person in my building except for my roommate. But, I also knew I was riding home on my bike from work one night about 2 o'clock in the morning, and the streetlights in Chicago are in the middle. They're strung, they're not street posts, lights on either side of the street. They have the wires that come in, and the street light is in the middle because there's so many trees on all those streets. And so I always rode home in the middle of the night and on my bicycle in the middle of the street because I knew that was the most light area. And out of nowhere, some kids came, knocked me off my bike. And before I even hit the ground, the other kids that I knew came over and knocked them over and got me back on my bike. And literally it happened that fast. But I knew, one was the gang that was from the other block and one was from my block. And it just so happened that my block kids who knew me, recognized that something bad was about to happen to one of their peeps, were there and were able to step in and correct the situation, where I ended up with, just a big scrape on my elbow and a scrape on my knee and was back up before I knew it. So I think that whole sense of white privilege has much more to do with the unconscious
right
part of it.
I think white privilege and white supremacy are the same thing. They are the same thing. White privilege and white supremacy.
Angelo actually addresses the issues you raised, Lindsay, in the book, and one that we'll talk about next week. But I want to ask it as a question that can lead into next week is do all of you feel what she says is equating the word with racism and, as Lindsay said, white supremacy, that equals in your mind that you are a bad person?
No.
In other words, that's where a lot of the white fragility comes from, she indicates, is because we too often connect that with that we're bad people, and therefore we don't even want to hear that we are white supremacists and racists. And so we shut down and we don't do anything to try and solve the problem.
Diane has her hand up too. Diane?
Hi. I have two really important ones to share, and I'm going to do the first one because I think it's the most important in my life. Some of you may have met Micah, my one daughter that's not really my daughter, but she's lived with us for a year. She's Kaylee's friend, and I took her in when her family couldn't take care of her for a while, and so she stayed with us for a year. And just recently, she's moved back home, which I'm hoping will stay and will be a good fit. But about 2 weeks ago, so I've had this girl in my house every day for a year. I've mothered her, I've dressed her, she's my daughter. She turns and she has a friend over who I know who is part Hispanic and part, I want to say something else, but I can't remember. But she's a very light-skinned girl, but with Afro-American hair and stuff like that. And what was it? Puerto Rican, that's it. Sorry, Puerto Rican and African-American. I couldn't get it right. So they were joking around and they're like, what? We're passing. And I looked at Micah, I said, passing is what? And she's like, white? And I was like, well, how could you be passing for white if you're white? She's like, I'm not white. Never crossed my mind that she might have anything else but white. It was my assumption. I never asked her. She is not white. She is 50% Japanese. I had no idea. She doesn't look Japanese by my standards, right? So how horrible I felt when I realized that I had been categorically putting her into one thing just because that's what I'm used to doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not because I ever asked her, not because I ever listened to her talk about it, right? She assumed I knew. And I was like, I don't see those traits on you. I can't make that assumption. I'm a nurse. I feel like my whole life is assessing people and knowing how to fit things in and look for different things and notice the differences in different people. And I failed horribly.
Yes.
And then they teased me about it, of course, for 2 weeks, because that's how kids are. But I never thought, what if she's something else? It never crossed my mind.
Right.
You know, and I still can't remember what her friend is because it doesn't bother me what her friend is. It doesn't make a difference. But I don't think of her as white because she's not a very white, pale skin, right? But that's that racism in you that puts people into categories based on skin color or eye shape.
Yeah. Well, you know, I appreciate that, Diane, and that is an interesting observation. And in one of the first couple of, I think it's the third or fourth chapter in the book, D'Angelo addresses that kind of issue with talking about the idea of color blindness. And that all of us want to think that we're colorblind and that we don't look at people's color. And yet the truth from all kinds of research indicates that obviously we do notice people's skin color. But by saying we're colorblind prevents us then from grappling with the fact that in reality we do see color. And when we do see color, that unconsciously and consciously we react from a racial perspective. So again, I encourage you to read the book. She raises a lot of these issues in the book, and as Linda Gutowski said earlier, and I think in a very compelling way. It's not an attacking way in terms of attacking us, but it is saying we need to confront the issues of racism in ourselves and in our society. Anyone else have a comment?
Sue Klein has her hand up.
Sue, and then we'll go to Marie.
Oh, okay, I just at the beginning of this journey, which for me was not all that long ago, in terms of my lifetime, the term white privilege was understandable to me and acceptable to me because I was really trying to learn about it. And the term white supremacy it upset me because I thought of white supremacists as the people in Charlottesville and in a march. And I have learned, I think, from this book and from other things I've read and learned that white supremacy is the system in this country. And that the way that this country has been governed from the very beginning with the need for slaves, etc., has been to keep the whites on top. And it's been governed this way. And it is the system that we live in that has given us the privilege. And so I am no longer offended by the term white supremacy. I think it's a fact of this country and probably much of Western Europe in particular. But that's just where I am with those terms.
Yeah, thank you, Sue. That was a good point. I want to go to Marie. And Marie, you're relatively new to us. This is the second time you've joined us, and welcome and thank you. And what is your comment?
Thank you. Michael instigated some thoughts in my mind because when reading D'Angelo, she's very wordy. And, you know, I have a hard time sometimes getting my arms around things she's saying. I have to put the book down, think about it, and so on. But there were three things that I wanted to touch on real quick. The one thing that Michael said, you know, we've all, especially as white people, have been brought up, you can be anything you want to be. You know, you grow up, you work hard, you do the right things, and so on, and you'll be successful. In my early years as an elementary school teacher, I worked in all Black communities and very diverse communities. And I used to come home and just sit down and cry because I lost that belief. It didn't hold true for everybody. I could see it from kindergarten through high school. That to me bothers me. That saying has always bothered me since. The only other thing that Michael said that made me think about something, after in my career, after I had moved out of the education field, I moved into facilitating adults in the corporate environment and so on. And when Michael mentioned, you know, how hard his mom worked, but to be told that it's the result that she looked white and she was the result of white privilege, I immediately thought of in corporate, when we were conducting any affirmative action classes and so on, it's a similar feeling that Blacks feel or minorities feel if they don't look white, because it's the same thing. You got where you were because of affirmative action, which was not the objective of affirmative action. Affirmative action was giving minorities at least a foot in the door. And then I have to admit, the one thing I'm taking away from the book is I really have to sit back and look at what are my unconscious motivations or messages I miss, because I forget what chapter, but when she talked about the movie The Blind Side, and she went through a few scenes of that movie, talking how offensive it would be for people of color. And I thought, oh my Lord, here I'm thinking, oh, that was a sweet movie, you know? She went out and helped this guy and yada, yada. But after I read that chapter, it blew my mind. And it really showed that I really have to step back and look at what I think, how I think it, because I always thought I was a, quote, good person, but I'm a good person that has no clue sometimes.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Marie. Wonderful discussion. I want to be able to continue for the next 5 hours or however long, but I want to call on two more people and then we'll move on. We'll be having many more discussion opportunities throughout this month, but I want to call on, I think, Alan, did you have your?
Yeah.
Yes, and then we'll go to Pete Patterson, and then we'll go back to Lindsay for the rest of our service.
Okay. I grew up in New York, and I came here to the University of Cincinnati in '69. I grew up Jewish, and growing up in New York Jewish is normal. That's just the way we were. My friends were Jewish, but my school was integrated. It was very integrated. I think we had maybe around 30% of our school was Black, and our friends were Black also. So I just did not grow up with much anti-Semitism or racial prejudice, and that's just the way it was. I knew it existed, but I didn't experience it myself. In '69, I came to Cincinnati, and I got hit in the face with it. I made it well known that I was Jewish, and boy, did I run into problems. I found, however, I could hide. I don't look Jewish, I had blonde hair, and I basically didn't mention it to anybody after a while because I didn't want to have to deal with it. I was in a strange land, in a strange environment, and I just put it aside, and it got pushed back. Because in all honesty, I wasn't very Jewish, hence I became eventually a Unitarian, but I just did not do it. in a way, I sort of became complicit in the society that we had because I didn't fight against it. I just sort of let it ride because it wasn't altogether that important to me. Every now and then I would bring it up if it was a safe place, but it was not something that was seriously important to me.
Yeah.
But about 7 years ago, Anita and I tried to sell a car. And this guy came out from Western Hills to buy this car. And we're talking about it. And we're talking about the price. And he says to me, hey, look, I'm not trying to Jew you. And I just had this great desire to kick him off my property.
Yeah.
But I wanted to sell the car,
Yeah.
which I did. And I wonder whether or not I have been complicit in just perpetuating this white superiority, even though I'm hiding in it, and knowing that a black cannot do what I did. He can't just hide like I did.
Yeah.
Right.
But it makes me more sensitive to it.
Yeah. Thank you, Alan. That was a very good comment in terms of complicity and what it means to be white, that we don't even have to think about it like black people might. Thank you very much. We'll conclude our discussion with Pete Patterson.
I just wanted to add to Sue's comments about white supremacy. And there's a blog some of you may know about called Scene on Radio,
Yes.
where scene is spelled S-C-E-N-E, and their theme for the fourth year is white supremacy. And they go back to the beginning with slavery and show that ever since the development of the United States, the laws, all of the practices, the courts, the police, and whatever, are all built around the idea of white supremacy and maintaining white supremacy. So it's a very interesting series, and it, aside from the current organization that proposes white supremacy, which we all are repelled by, the U.S. talking about it being racist, it's actually built on the idea of white supremacy from beginning to end. So it'd be, if you want to learn more about that, I highly recommend the blog Scene on Radio. It's out of Duke University.
Thank you very much, Peter. It sounds interesting. Thank you, everyone who's made comments. As I said, there'll be 4 more Sundays to discuss and add your comments, and try and remember to have people speak next week who weren't able to speak today. But I do thank you. As I said, I do think this is a very important book. It is written by a white person to white people. And as she says, the issue of racism in our nation was created by white people, not by us, but it was created by white people. It's our responsibility. And so as white people need to confront this together in addressing it in ourselves and in our society. So thank you all. And I'll turn it back over to Lindsay for the remainder of our service.
Thank you, Doug, and thank you all for that really interesting discussion. Now is the time in our service when we share our wealth, and for those of us who, anyone who's a guest or new to our service, please know that the gift of your presence is gift enough for us. But for all of us members that can, please take a moment and pull out your checkbook or go to the Give Lee app and remember to support the important work of our beloved community. Michael?
All right, yeah, so Alan is going to get this video up here in just a second, but I just want to say this is another one of those songs that I just want to point out has been very co-opted by white people and everything. And I have a little blurb. If you want to just read it, the video will play. There's a little bit of just an explanation about what the song, where it comes from and everything as the song is playing. So just read that. take it in and just, it's something to think about. Still a great tune though. This is Down to the River to Pray.
As I went down to the river to pray, studying about that good old way, and who shall wear the starry crown? Good Lord, show me the way. Oh, sisters, let's go down, come on down. Oh, sisters, let's go down to the river to pray. As I went down to the river to pray, studying about that good old way, and who shall wear the robe and crown? Good Lord, show me the way. Oh, brothers, let's go down, come on down. Oh, brothers, let's go down to the river to pray. As I went down to the river to pray, studying about that good old way, and who shall wear the starry crown? Good Lord, show me the way. Oh, sinners, let's go down, come on down. Oh, sinners, let's go down to the river to pray. Oh, sinners, let's go down, come on down. Oh, sinners, let's go down to the river to pray. Oh, sinners, let's go down, oh, sinners, let's go down to the river to
Thank you, Michael, and thank you as well for helping us understand more of the history of that song. That's long been a favorite of mine, and I did not know the potential Native American connection. That's really interesting. Next part of our service is called Joys and Sorrows. And what I want to do first is just make a couple of quick notes. One is, Jenny, it was awesome to see you in person on our screen today. And we know you're still recovering and healing, but we have all been thinking about you. And Paul, it was great to see you today on the, I don't know where, oh, Paul, there he is. And the other thing is that Philip Berenson had an infection come up in her from her knee surgery, and so she ended up having to go back to the hospital. So she's not feeling up to calls right now, but emails and cards would be wonderful if anyone has the time or inclination to do that. And also, Mary Lou Offman is recovering from a recent hospitalization. Her son is caring for her, but notes and phone calls are always welcome. Arlene Thorwart would appreciate some cards and is feeling a bit disconnected as she still lives alone. And remember, if you haven't had the chance to reconnect with your support group from GNH, please reconnect with Reverend Doug, and he can let you know who's on your team. Also, Cheryl Lexon has a very close friend and her husband who both have COVID-19. And the husband is actually on a ventilator in ICU. She's taking care of their daughter right now, but if you could please keep Cheryl and her friends in your thoughts, that would be very, very important. And then since I'm service leader today, I will start with mine. My niece has who many of you have met, Nicole. Her beau has two black cats that they cannot bring to their new apartment. And so we are kind of frantically looking for either a short-term foster home or a longer-term adoptive home. That they're delightful cats, and I will send the little flyer maybe to you, Doug, so you can send it out to everyone. But if anyone knows of anyone who's willing to foster or who might be looking for a little company in the middle of the pandemic, they're two black cats, one 2 years old and one 7, and they are quite entertaining. So I open it up to anyone else for joys and sorrows. Diane?
Yes, I kind of already said it. Micah's gone home, and that's kind of a joy and a sorrow. I'm very happy she's gone back to her mom, and she's trying to make it work out. And she knows she always has a home to come back to if she needs us, but for now it seems to be working. Yay. So that's both my joy and my sorrow. I lost a child for now. I mean, she'll still come visit and everything. We're not going to go that far, but you know, it just kind of feels weird to have kids out of the house that were in the house. But that's my joy. That's it. No sorrows this week.
Okay.
We're staying on the joys.
Betsy, did you have something? Did I see your hand go up? No. Okay. Anyone else that I'm missing? One other just quick joy from our house. Ian's university is still planning on opening up. So they have lots of new rules and regulations, but he's delighted to actually have the chance to leave. So keep your fingers crossed. Okay, and one more nod for those of us who have other joys and sorrows on our hearts that we aren't sharing today. But please know that we're all keeping each other in our thoughts and prayers. And finally, we're going to sing together, Lift Every Voice and Sing. Michael?
I don't have much to say about this one. It's the Black National Anthem, so just paying a little respect to the Black community here.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Michael. And for closing words today, I think many of you will find them familiar. They are from the essay that John Lewis wrote that was published in the New York Times on the day he was buried. Like so many young people today, I was searching for a way out, or some might say a way in. And then I heard the voice of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on an old radio. He was talking about the philosophy and discipline of nonviolence. He said we were all complicit when we tolerate injustice. He said it is not enough to say it will get better by and by. He said each of us has a moral obligation to stand up, and speak out. When you see something that is not right, you must say something. You must do something. Democracy is not a state. It is an act, and each generation must do its part to help build what we called the beloved community, a nation and world society at peace with itself. Ordinary people with extraordinary vision can redeem the soul of America by getting in what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. Voting and participating in the democratic process are key. The vote is the most powerful nonviolent change agent you have in a democratic society. You must use it because it is not guaranteed. You can lose it. Rest in peace, John Lewis. And remember, I'm going to pass off now the service leader role to Sue Klein for questions and answers on the ministerial transition that we are anticipating for September 1.